How much time should I actually spend practicing each day? This has to be one of the most common questions that I get asked as a teacher, but the answer should be obvious. Everybody knows that to be a good musician, you have to practice 40 hours a day.
Ling, how come you sound so good, but I don't?
Well, that's because I practice 40 hours a day.
Otherwise, Ling Ling will take all your concerts and all your money and you'll end up broke and crying yourself to sleep on the streets every single night. Or is it really true that more practice inherently makes you a better musician? By the way, this is my first collaborative video on my channel. Later, you'll be hearing from Carl-Friedrich, who has an awesome YouTube channel, so you should definitely check that out. The link will be in the description below. So when someone asks how much they or their child should practice, because it's usually a parent asking, they're expecting a number like your child should practice 30 minutes a day, or your child should practice 3 hours a day, or your child should practice 40 hours a day. Now, granted, a lot of people I know do set time limits on their practice and stick to that daily routine schedule, and if that works for you, great. However, what most people don't realize about being a professional musician is that our schedules tend to change a lot. That's because between teaching, students, doing last-minute reschedulings, rehearsals, gigs, and classes if you're a college student, it's sometimes not so easy as just practicing every evening between 5 to 8 p.m., for example. And because I've had to get used to not having a really consistent schedule, I think I've learned to address this issue in a different way. So I don't ask how much time should I spend practicing a day. I ask, how can I maintain a high degree of focus and interest when I practice? Or in other words, it's that basic quality versus quantity argument. Of course, you want both, but if you had to maximize one, it's better to practice a shorter time more efficiently. In fact, it's efficiency that is perhaps the key word for me, because in general, it's preferable to spend a couple of hours of deep practice on a piece than to spend 5 or 6 hours of unfocused practice time along with other negative practice habits. I can confidently say that I get more work done in 2 hours of focused practice than I did during my undergrad when I would practice 5 or 6 hours a day. Learning how to practice effectively is one of the most fundamental things you need to know as a musician, and refining this practice will take a lifetime. As the famous cellist Pablo Casals once said when asked why he still practiced at the age of 83, "Because I think I'm making progress." Along the way, you'll learn to employ more and more methods which help you to be more efficient in your musical studies. One of these primary concepts that helped me refine my own practice efficiency was the concept of flow from Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. Originally, I came across this concept on a YouTube video with a coach who was talking about the main difference in training between wrestlers in America versus those in Russia. At this point, Russia was producing all the champions, and he explained the approach to the workouts was totally different than the American programs. You see, in America, this concept is drilled into us from the time we're very young. You've got to work hard, give 100%, push yourself to the limit, go until failure, and then get up and go again. In contrast, the coach said that in Russia, the approach was to go only about 70 to 80%. Go until you start feeling a little bit of fatigue and your energy is going, and then stop and come back the next day. Now, to my American brain, when I first heard this, my immediate knee-jerk reaction was to think that this is absolute heresy. I mean, if I'm not pushing myself to my absolute limit, I'm just wasting time, right? Or I'm not being serious enough, and if I only give a partial effort, it's because I'm weak. Does your country have this mentality? I know the US is not the only one. On the surface, all of these arguments seem correct, logical, and they seem like a noble rule to live by. But the counter argument that these coaches make is actually quite simple, because when a person pushes themselves to the absolute limit, it's like redlining the body and the mind. Yes, you get maximum potential, but then the next day you're exhausted. Your body needs to recover, and not only that, your mind needs to recover, because all that fatigue just kills your motivation. If you've ever done an incredibly intense workout, you know you have to try twice as hard just to step foot into the gym the next day, and when you're there, you have to try twice as hard to work out, and then the cycle repeats. And this inevitably leads to burnout. In contrast, if you only work out to the point of a little fatigue where you're starting to feel good, those endorphins are flowing and they're kicking in, if you shut it down, then heading back to the gym the next day will be far easier, both mentally and physically, because you won't feel like a cripple trying to run a marathon the next day. As an end result of following this practice, these wrestlers were practicing many, many more hours over the course of the long term with fewer injuries, more focused energy, and that's really why they ended up winning. And that's the point of this philosophy. It's not just about giving 70% of the effort, it's about establishing a habit which ultimately leads to more and more practice time that is focused and productive in the long term. So that is essentially the idea of what flow is. When you're trying to progress or learn a new skill, the goal is to get into this flow state where you're totally involved in the moment. This is the natural state that the mind enters when it's having fun when playing a game, for example. And time seems like it's just flying by. It's because we're in that perfect balance between difficulty and our own skill set. You see, if the difficulty is too low, it leads to boredom, and if the difficulty is too high, it leads to stress, anxiety, and eventually giving up. One of the reasons video games are so addictive is that the better games are brilliant at keeping the player in a flow state. You'll know this if you've ever tried to jump in on a new game when the difficulty is way too high. You might try a few times and quickly give up because you lose so quickly. And if you're really good at the game, going back to level 1 is going to be really boring and you'll get tired of it as well. So games are always pushing the difficulty level just enough to get you in the zone, and before you know it, you've just wasted hours of your life. Or made a ton of money if you're a professional gamer. As I said, this concept revolutionized my practice as well as a lot of other things in my life, like exercise, as well as any new skills that I try to learn. And it's become my default mode of doing things as much as I can. Now, obviously, there are going to be times where there's deadlines, moments you'll have to cram, moments where you have to push yourself because life happens. But I generally strive to get in that flow state, and I find that it gives me the best results. Now, it's important to note that this is not an excuse to slack off and still expect to be a great musician if you only practice 30 minutes a day, even if those 30 minutes are given with absolute perfect attention and practice methods. According to a research paper published by the University of Queensland, research suggests that an average of 4 hours of practice per day over the period of 10 years is required to achieve the expert level. Yet this number varies depending on the instrument played. Jorgensen showed that pianists and violinists practiced the most, followed by woodwind, brass, and singers. This could be explained by the physical demands associated with playing of particular instruments. For example, the exertion of the lungs and the lips of brass players prevents them from practicing as long as string players. So you see again, you want both, but you don't just want quantity without any quality of practice, because that can actually be very detrimental to your progress.
And because of that, you should know the law of diminishing returns. What is this weird law? Let me make an example. Imagine there's a field of corn. Now you say, the next year we want to have more corn than this year. You take more seeds, you work harder, and the next year comes and you have more corn. Then you try it again. You want even more corn, you work harder, you take more seeds, and you get slightly more corn, but not that much more. You think something went wrong, you want to try again, next year comes, but this year you have way less corn than both of the years before. But what has this to do with practicing? Let me explain. There's the total amount of work that you can accomplish on a regular basis per day. Based on your genetics and the skill you want to learn, the total amount of hours can vary, but you can increase this time over time. Here's an example for practicing. You start with 4 hours today, but you think you could do more. Then tomorrow you do 5 hours. The next day you do 7 hours. Then the day after that you go back into practicing, and after 3 hours you can't concentrate at all. Your fingers hurt, you're just done for the day. This directly correlates with what Josh told you earlier in this video about the wrestlers. The ones who went to their maximum every day couldn't sustain the level of effort throughout a longer period of time, so the Russian wrestlers who worked smarter won. That does not mean that you shouldn't push yourself to excellence, and that does not mean that you shouldn't work hard or go out of your comfort zone, but it means working in a smart way so you can sustain it over a longer period of time. That's how you're going to beat the game. The second principle is actually a book. It's one of Josh and mine's favorite ones. Deep work is not about practicing per se. It's about work in general. It suggests that being able to completely immerse yourself in a complex task is a rare, valuable, and meaningful skill that society unlearned for various reasons. The main idea of deep work is to concentrate yourself on one task. Just one, without any interruptions, with the highest efficiency possible, preferably in one big chunk. This could mean telling your roommates not to interrupt you and turning your phone off. Just very small distractions will pull you out of focus so far that it can take up to 15 minutes to get back into whatever task you're pursuing. Let's make an example. You still go to school, live with your parents, and you say to yourself that you want to practice every evening from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. with the highest amount of efficiency. You don't think about anything else during this time, just music and your instrument. Tell your parents that they shouldn't interrupt you, because it will take time to get back in this flow state Josh talked about earlier. What you can do additionally is to set yourself small goals, what you want to accomplish in the next 2 hours. Let's say in the first hour you're going to learn 2 new pages, and the second one you re-practice what you practiced the last days before. During minute 77 you will think, man, this is a long time and I'm starting to get bored without my phone. And yes, you're damn right, but that's exactly when you learn something. If you combine these 2 principles with the third one I'm going to tell you right now, you're unstoppable. The third one is the so-called Pareto Principle. Pareto says that 80% of the results you get are made by 20% of the effort. Vice versa, 20% of the result is made by 80% of the effort. This principle occurs in nature as well as in economics. For example, 20% of the people inherit 80% of the money. And you can apply this principle to practicing as well. 80% of your results from practicing are made by 20% of the practicing. If you can figure out what those 20% are, you're going to learn any piece at least like twice as fast. Even if you want those 93% results, this principle still applies to you, but you just have to practice a little longer. So how can you combine these 3 principles? Figure out how much you can practice so that it's hard, but you're not exhausted and you can repeat it day after day after day. When you practice, plan everything so nothing will distract you. And just concentrate on this one single task with all the concentration you have. Focus on the 20% that bring you the most results and cut out everything unnecessary like the first time playing the easy fun part. So how much did you practice now? To summarize everything I just told you, the absolute maximum amount of hours per day with at least 85 to 90% concentration, but just as much so that you can consistently do it over a long period of time.
If you want a free piano lesson, if you sign up within the next 48 hours to my Patreon, I'll give you a free 30-minute lesson. Don't forget to check out Carl's channel. I hope this was helpful for you guys. Let me know if you have any questions or comments below. You guys are awesome. I will see you in the next video.